It's 112 years since the Titanic sank, and tomorrow two of the most valuable items recovered from the wreckage are going up for auction.
That's a violin case and gold pocket watch belonging to two of the most significant people on board the ship. And they're expected to fetch more than £120,000 each. Duncan Kennedy has more.
It was supposed to be the defining standard of nautical opulence. The Titanic, totemic of a new era of human achievement. But on the night of April the 14th, 1912, the ship hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sank. More than 1,500 people died. Now, two of the most valuable personal items ever recovered from the disaster are coming to auction. A bag and a watch belonging to two people whose stories have become fables from that fateful night.
And you're in the club.
The James Cameron movie Titanic depicts both men.
Well, hello, Molly.
John Jacob Astor, the wealthiest man on board and one of the richest in the world. And Wallace Hartley, the violin player who bravely led the orchestra to calm passengers' nerves as the vessel floundered. Each man central to the film's narrative of bravery and loss. In real life, both Hartley and Astor died that night. Their bodies and their possessions recovered in the aftermath.
We've got the bag and the watch.
Correct, yeah. These are
Andrew Aldridge, a world expert on the Titanic, says Hartley probably tried to use his violin case and its straps as a flotation device, but it came to nothing. Whilst J.J. Astor's 14-carat gold pocket watch was discovered amongst his personal effects in the days after the tragedy.
Why is there this continuing public obsession, interest in all things to do with the Titanic?
I honestly think it's to do with the people. She transcends so many different levels. We are fascinated in her because of who was on board. You could argue that Titanic is the most famous ship that's ever sailed, apart from the Ark.
So what might they fetch at the auction? Well, the estimated price on the bag is £120,000. And for the watch, it's £150,000. And just shows the continued interest there is in all things Titanic.
Wallace Hartley's violin itself was sold separately in 2013 for £1 million. It's now on display at the Titanic Museum in Belfast. Tomorrow's auction, streamed live, will attract bidders from around the world, ready to spend as they save these unique items from a ship enshrined in maritime folklore. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
Titanic exhibitor Tom Rudderham joins us now. Tom, morning to you.
Good morning.
You know, I caught a glimpse out of you at the side of my eye, and I just saw all these things behind you, and I did also notice that you had gloves on. And I wondered, excellent. And so it kind of popped in my head that you may be able to perhaps pick some things up and show us them.
Oh, I would love to, yeah. This isn't a fashion statement.
You've got some things that are priceless, haven't you, there?
We have, as you just heard on the VT, the bodies of Astor and the violin player were recovered from the sea about 2 weeks after the disaster. Their bodies were picked up by recovery vessels sent to find these victims. And at the same time, they would collect any wreckwood, anything floating on the surface to use as evidence. And a lot of this ended up on display in museums around the world, including Canada. We're very fortunate to be the current custodians of these artifacts. So I have a few here. Perhaps the most surprising is a set of legs from a deck chair. They're probably going to fill the screen. Very delicate. These were found floating in the sea after 2 weeks. Very rusty, very damaged. But perhaps my favourite is what we believe to be the largest piece of the after-grand staircase. And this gives us a really good idea of what the ship looked like in its prime. So this was found floating in the sea. Huge piece of wood.
It also gives an idea, doesn't it, of just how ornate it was. You know, you think of the Titanic and we always talk about how obviously, you know, it crashed into an iceberg, but actually it was such a luxurious vessel, wasn't it? And even if the staircase has ornate carving like that, you can only imagine what the rest of the place was like.
Oh, precisely. This was carved from solid English oak, beautiful design with grapes and leaves. The entire grand staircase was carved like this, and at the centre of it all was this beautiful clock, the Honour and Glory clock. You'll recognise it from the movie. There was a cherub of solid bronze, and a big dome above it all. But as we heard earlier, people are still interested in the Titanic because of the human connections. And we're very fortunate to have some artifacts. For example, here's a pocket watch from William Major. He was a fireman on board the vessel. He survived. He kept that watch for the rest of his life. And then we have Wallace Hartley's music sheet. So as we just heard, the violin was sold for nearly £1 million in 2013. The bag comes up tomorrow. The bag contained his violin, and it also contained many of his music books. We're very fortunate to have the final sheet of one of his music books here, the Starland music sheet. That would have been in the briefcase alongside his violin. And it's remarkable that it survived in the sea for 2 weeks, floating. It is water damaged. Just on the back, it's water stained. Being very careful there. But the story of Wallace Hartley and J.J. Astor, they are what keep the Titanic alive. So to have these artifacts come up at auction is rather remarkable, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, good morning to you. It's Charlie here. It's absolutely fascinating, all the things you're showing us. Are there yet things that we are looking for that were known to be on board the Titanic, yet to be discovered? Is there a sort of holy grail item that is yet to be found?
Many items. There was a beautiful hardbound book. I'm sure it does not survive anymore. It would have rotted away at the bottom of the sea. There was a passenger on board who had a video camera, and who knows what footage he would have filmed. There are photos that survive that were taken on board. They were taken by Father Brown. He got off the ship at Queenstown, now called Cove, in Ireland. But imagine how remarkable it would be to see footage from the Titanic. But all the artifacts that survive today were the personal items of crew and passengers. That's why they survive, as well as a few items of wreckwood. And of course, there were several missions, hundreds of missions to the wreck site in the 90s and 2000s, and there are 5,500 items that have been brought up from the seabed, structural items such as a 22-piece of the hull, and personal items such as clothing. So the story of the Titanic is most things that can be found have been found, but it would be amazing to find a video camera or a book, an ornate book.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, just as a final thought, and you referenced this a moment ago, and we talk about artefacts, don't we? Do you think sometimes in the mix of telling the story, we lose sight of the personal tragedies, the scale of what happened? And maybe almost we're a bit guilty of it now because we're talking about things rather than lives.
That's right. I think it's important to recognise more than 1,500 people died. And at our exhibitions, we try and focus on a single item from a passenger or crew, such as a pocket watch. Well, we have a set of playing cards from Elsie Bauman. She survived in Lifeboat 6. She was sat in the boat alongside Molly Brown. So these are some of our most precious items. It's important to remember these people with their items and artifacts and to tell the story of them. That's why we do exhibitions. We take our exhibitions around the country. We're at the NEC this summer. And we try to keep the story alive. We do it tastefully, but it is easy sometimes to get carried away by these amazing artifacts. So we try our best.
Tom, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you for sort of showing us around the exhibits you have there. Tom Rudderham is director at the White Star Heritage, looking at some of those items from the Titanic.
I can see how it's easy to get carried away with those.
Yeah.
Really easy.